In episode 5, all the kids head to Miyagi-Do that day for practice. Eli, Dimitri, Sam, and Miguel start talking about their college decisions, and Miguel's a little stressed out because he hasn't heard from Stanford yet. And when Eli tries to make him feel better by saying, well, Dimitri hasn't heard from MIT, Dimitri cuts in and says, oh, yeah, no, I did. I got in. And then he just starts gaslighting all of them, making stuff up, saying, why do you guys look all surprised? I mean, I worked my ass off to get into MIT. And then he throws all his vitriol at Eli's direction. To say Dimitri's a little defensive right now is an understatement. The two other people that are over in the corner training are Tori and Robbie. And Tori had a really interesting morning. She headed to the hospital to get the latest on her mother, and her mother is doing much better. So Tori was really in a good mood when she left the hospital, but then she ran into a familiar face in the parking lot, John Kreese. Kreese wants to get his champion back, and as Tori tells him, I'm a champion, but I'm not your champion. She tells him to pound sand, kick rocks, and leave her alone. She has no interest in joining any team he's got going or ever talking to him again. She doesn't want the word to get out that she's still in contact with John Kreese, so she makes Robbie swear that he won't tell anybody about this interaction, and Robbie says, yeah, no problem, I'll keep it under wraps. As all the kids gather for that day's lesson, there is one noticeable absence, and it's Kenny. Nobody's heard from him since the embarrassment of the forest. Johnny and Daniel, though, get all the kids together, and they say that now the last thing to do is to formulate the team captains, guy captain, girl captain. They think it's only fair that the top 2 men and the top 2 women go against each other. So that means that Miguel will be going against Robbie and Sam will be going against Tori. It's a rematch of the All Valley. For that day, Johnny's going to lead the training, which Daniel didn't know was the plan. But Johnny says, dude, don't worry about it. You just train them tomorrow. Don't worry, we're all under the same banner, right? Miyagi-Do. And at first, it seems like it starts out like that, but Daniel isn't a fan of Johnny's methods, let's call them. I mean, in one instance, he's firing beer bottles at the kid as they try to balance on a raft. It's Miyagi-Do, but it's with a Johnny Lawrence twist. Either way, Daniel has to complain about something that night, so when he gets in front of Amanda, he starts to complain about Johnny overtaking the lesson. Daniel tells Amanda that ever since they found out there are only 6 spots and 2 captains, Johnny's worst impulses are rushing back. If Mr. Miyagi could see what he's done to Miyagi-Do, he'd be mortified. And Amanda says, well, maybe you're right. I mean, how do you really know? After we found out about Mr. Miyagi, anything's possible. But Daniel gets all defensive and he says, I know who Mr. Miyagi was, and this is not what he would have wanted. Over at Johnny's apartment that night, Miguel walks in with some unfortunate news. He got deferred to Stanford. He's looking at it like he didn't get in. Carmen and Johnny remind him that, well, it might not be a yes, but it's also not a no. This, though, makes the captaincy very, very important. If Miguel were to get an honor of captain for a Saikai Taikai team, that could really boost his chances of getting into Stanford, and he knows it. So now beating Robbie is really, really important. The next day, as he's talking to Sam about Stanford and the captaincy, the Saikai Taikai, the whole 9, Robbie walks up. Because Robbie hasn't seen Tori and he hasn't heard from her, which is super, super weird. The two were supposed to train later that day in the park, so he came to Miguel and Sam to find out if maybe they've heard from her. And they say, no, we haven't heard from her. But the idea that Tori and Robbie would be training together makes a lot of sense. So Sam and Miguel decide, yeah, we should probably train together too. That day's training, though, is going to be run by Daniel, as agreed upon by Johnny. Although when it actually comes time to run the training, Johnny feels like he's getting sabotaged. Both Johnny and Daniel are at LaRusso Auto, and Daniel stuck Johnny with the test drive clients. Johnny feels like Daniel is shutting him out of training, but Daniel assures him, no, Johnny, this is not me shutting you out, man. This is Thursday. You always do test drives on Thursday, and I, being the boss, get to leave whenever I want, which is what I'm doing because somebody has to train the kids. I assure you, it's going to be a normal training session. You're not missing much. Daniel, though, completely lied. It wasn't a normal training session. He decided to only train with Miguel and Sam. He goes in the forest and he starts doing the whole Miyagi-Do stuff. And Johnny, who was in the middle of a test drive with a client, notices Daniel's yellow Mr. Miyagi car just parked in the middle of nowhere, and he has the guy stop off. And he confronts Daniel about this, saying, dude, what the hell? You told me this was going to be a normal training session? This isn't a normal training session. Daniel shoots back, I don't have to explain myself to you. Yeah, we're a partnership in the dojo, but we're just reviewing kata out here, man. It's not that big of a deal. But then Daniel gets really pissed off because he notices that Johnny was on a test drive with the client, and that's just not a good look for his business. He orders Johnny back to the dealership, and when Johnny gets back to the dealership, he becomes Timu version of Jerry Maguire. He stands up. He says he's going to start his own dealership. Who's coming with him? Well, shockingly, nobody comes with him. But Amanda gets him off the table and into an office and asks him what the hell's going on. And a very pissed off Johnny explains the situation, and Amanda is able to calm him down by saying it's not that big of a deal, but also letting him in on the fact that Daniel's going through a lot right now with Mr. Miyagi. They found this box, and turns out he wasn't the saint that Daniel made him out to be, so Daniel's a little bit on edge. Cut him some slack. And Johnny says, yeah, okay, I will. After training in the forest that day, when Miguel heads home, he runs into Robbie in the quad. Robbie tried to get in touch with Tori all day to no luck. They were supposed to train in the park, but it forced Robbie to train by himself. And that training by himself gave him a lot of time to do some soul searching. Robbie's finished second year after year after year. This is really his first chance to be a winner, and he knows it. And Miguel just wants to make sure that there are no hard feelings. But a couple words get said that get misinterpreted the wrong way, and it just gets awkward between the two. It only gets broken up when Carmen comes out and says, hey, I made burgers if anybody wants one. But nobody wants burgers. Everybody wants revenge. Now, this is really going to shock you, but when Daniel gets home that day, he complains about Johnny. I mean, he whines his ass off. And Amanda has to let him know, it's all right. Don't worry about it. You're making too much out of this whole situation. Get ready for tomorrow's competition. That's the important thing here. So when Johnny and Daniel get to the dojo the next day, they do have a different mindset thanks to Amanda. They both apologize for the previous day's drama. They remind each other that they are fighting for the same thing here, and they want what's best for the kids. And because of that, Daniel's going to ref the boys' fight to keep Johnny out of it because he's attached to these kids, while Johnny's going to ref the girls' fight. The only problem is, one girl isn't there. Tori's not there. Tori's been missing for a few days. And that's because after running into John Kreese and getting home that night, she found her mother dead. She's been grieving since the moment, going through a really, really tough time. But she hasn't told anybody. Nobody knows what Tori's going through. So when Tori shows up in the middle of Daniel and Robbie's fight, Devin looks at her and says, wow, you're here. Are you all right? And Tori just says, yeah, I'm fine. Robbie's able to win the boys' fight, and then comes the girls' fight. Sam and Tori have come a long way in their feud, and they do seem to be friends, but there's a different look in Tori's eye. You see a little bit of it in the fight when Tori gets a cheap shot on Sam, and Sam is very confused about this. But as the girls continue to fight to the 3 points, Amanda gets a call from the hospital because she was the next in line to get contacted about the death of Tori's mother. And she finds out what Tori's going through. And she tells Daniel, and Daniel steps in right before Tori is about to bash Sam's skull in. And he stops the fight. And no one can understand why. Tori's pissed off. Johnny's very confused. He thinks that Daniel's just on a power trip. And when Johnny says, why are we stopping this fight? Finally, Tori yells, because my mom died. That kind of changes the entire mood of everything. Most of the people there feel like this isn't a good time for Tori to be fighting. The only person that thinks that Tori should be fighting is Johnny, because it's Tori's decision. And Tori wants to fight. She says, my mom would want this right now. Let me fight. But everybody else just thinks it's not a great idea, and Daniel thinks that Tori doesn't really have the right mental state for this. Daniel tells Tori that they can do this another time, but Tori gets so pissed off, she just quits. She storms out of Miyagi-Do, and she says, I'm done. And that means that they have an opening. But before they announce the opening, Daniel and Johnny have to get into it. This has been simmering for a couple days now, and with Amanda out of the picture, the bad blood boils over into a big argument. Johnny feeling like Daniel didn't have a right to step in and stop that fight if Tori wanted to fight, and Daniel saying that's not what's best for the kids. But it culminates in Daniel punching Johnny when Johnny says that Mr. Miyagi wasn't some saint. Johnny doesn't retaliate, though. He just looks at Daniel and says, I'm going to finish this for those kids out there. But once the Saikai Taikai is over, me and you, we're done. We're through. The two senseis then head outside and announce that Hawk will be replacing Tori in the Saikai Taikai. And then they give each member of the Saikai Taikai their headbands. But Daniel notices something about the headband that he's putting on Sam. It looks really familiar. And when he's done putting it on Sam, he runs in and he checks that Mr. Miyagi box, and he finds out that Mr. Miyagi fought in the Saikai Taikai. And it was a bloody affair. I mean, that thing is, well, it's got blood on it, so it must have been a bloody affair. Now all that's left is for the kids to head to Barcelona. And when they arrive, they start eyeing up their competition. And that's when they're surprised because these 3 Korean kids show up dressed in Cobra Kai gear. And that's when they see Kim and John Kreese. And Daniel and Johnny are like, you got to be kidding me. This guy again? How did he show up here? But then they get a real shock because out of the shadows steps Tori. And that is something that literally nobody knew was going to happen. And that is the end of Cobra Kai Season 6, Part 1. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you like this. Karate chop that thumbs down button if you thought this video sucked. I have merch, by the way. I have like a t-shirt, grab a mug. It'd be super cool if you bought some of that stuff. But more than anything, I'd really just appreciate it if you're just nice in the comment section. If I mess something up, it's okay. Mistakes happen. Move on. Oh, and please don't forget, sharing is caring. So, share this thing on your social media platforms. And hopefully you'll come back for part 2.